So it sounds like there's a lot of first-timers, whereas a lot of the stuff that I have here covers what happens after you get your first gig and stuff like that. So I think what I want to do is just kind of start conversationally with you guys, talk about who I am, what my background is, why you care about listening to me, talk about some of my experiences getting started, because that sounds like it's the fruitful thing to talk about here. And then later on I will go into, what do you do after you get a gig? What are good ways to get gigs? How do you not be a douchebag? That kind of thing. I've heard a few horror stories coming from game developers about the process of what happens after they say, yeah, I want to do your project, I want to write music for you. And I'm going to share those. It's going to be exciting. So my name's Josh. I write music for video games. I'm also the co-founder and CTO of a company called Louder that does music distribution and licensing. So if you guys ever go and buy something like Smooth McGroove or like Game Chops, or you see it on Spotify or iTunes, it's through our company. And the reason that is because we're able to properly license and distribute that music and pay the rights holders properly as sales happen, so it's not upfront. Traditionally, for a lot of video game remixers, the problem of, ooh, I don't want to pay this upfront cost, because there is an upfront cost when you cover other people's music, especially video game music. It's not heavily spoken about because of places like OC Remix that make it so jolly and awesome to do it for free. Technically, that's not legal, but who gives a shit? It should be, and that's how I feel about it. But anyway, so my background in video game composition, I've written music for probably about 20 to 30 games professionally by now. A lot of them are mobile, some of them are bigger on Steam. Recently, a game called Obelisk came out with Adult Swim Games I wrote music for. If any of you guys know Mojang, I'm sure you do. I made Minecraft. I worked on the game Scrolls, which is sort of like Hearthstone, before Hearthstone took over. And right now I'm working on a pretty big game called Masquerada. It's going to be on Steam next quarter. And that's a big orchestral soundtrack, so that's really exciting.
It sounds cool.
It will be cool. I'm really pumped. It's the first time that I have a really big budget for live performers. So I'm now transitioning in the part of my career where my background was electronic chiptunes. I started doing MIDIs, like you're talking about, Stefan, where it's just like, okay, I'm focused on the music, right? That's kind of the first big thing. I studied classical music as well, and composition. Before that, before college, I studied a number of classical instruments. So my background is entirely classical, but I'm sort of like the bastard child of classical music, I felt like in school. And that is like everyone was always pushing me to do something that was a lot more formal than what I wanted to do, which is this. And so that's kind of the first big point I'll talk about. Video game music, composition, doing anything in life really, is you need to follow your heart, and there's not like a set path. So I'm going to tell you stories and experiences I have, but every single person I've talked to is different. And you should never feel like because somebody else did something some certain way that you need to follow that path. That's the first big thing. And the second thing I say at every panel is just don't stop writing music. If you feel like, oh, I'm going to write a song today, but I've got a reason not to, like, oh, maybe this person's not going to like it, maybe I'm not going to do a good enough job, you have to put those thoughts away when you want to be creative and when you want to be productive. And the only way that you can be successful and start to get gigs is when you write a lot of music. There's no way that you're going to just write 10 tunes and then someone's going to be like, that's the dude for me. Well, the reality is you have to be consistent and you have to be able to kind of bend your creative will to the creative will of others and collaborate. That's a lot of what I want to talk about. Okay, so let's see. What would I normally talk about if I was doing the other panel? It just seems like there's a lot of people interested in that. Normally what we do is we have a bunch of composers on. If you come to MAGFest Prime, there's a big panel we do kind of with MAGFest and all the composers who come as guests, where we do this nice like question and answer thing. So I kind of want to get straight into that portion before I go into this lectury business part and just have you guys ask me questions about the composition process, about maybe what's it like, or I don't know what's on your minds. I can't read your minds, so why don't we just start with some questions? You guys have any? Sure.
So this panel is actually really relevant to a situation I've gotten in since this last MAGFest. So after that, I ended up being contacted by Dev. They were doing the devs for Tumbleweed Express. They were the indie devs.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked me to do several tracks for them to fill in the gaps with their music. Because they previously had a sound guy who did sound design and music, and
those guys are
now
fun.
I'm kind of filling that role.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit of a unique kind of a hell, I guess, in style matching, because
Oh, yeah.
at that point you're trying to both put in your own creative influence and
Right, that's a struggle.
yeah, and like, so there's two things that I'm getting at here. One is, how do you deal with the pressure of feeling like you're trying to live up to a standard that was set in place prior for that sort of a situation? And secondly, like, the last guy they had actually either played guitar himself or had a guitarist with him. I'm not entirely sure
Yeah,
of the details.
okay, you're in an interesting position.
And so, as someone who is mostly sample-based, I am painfully aware of how horrible guitar samples sound already. And
Yeah.
so, I was planning on avoiding that in the first place, and then
Okay.
with that extra.
Yeah, so I can kind of take your first question about pressure, and it's really widespread. There's a lot of things you can say about it. That's going to happen in your position. So to kind of sum up, he's in a position where he's doing music and he's filling in blanks. There was another composer before, and he's got to somehow make an end product that is somebody else's creative energy merged with his own. And there's a lot of pressure to do that because the developers need that to have a consistent experience. However, as a composer, it's very difficult to try to mimic someone else's style. That's kind of where, if you get good at doing that, then you're kind of a badass, and your name is Jake Kaufman or Will Roger. And that's very hard to do. I can't really speak. I've been in that position too, and I just left the project. It was too much pressure. It wasn't worth it. And there was creative energy I had that could be better spent. I would say if you find yourself asking those kind of questions a lot during this cycle, maybe it's best to move on. But I also don't know what position you're in. I know it's really hard when you've got these first projects too, to say like, ah, screw it. As for the second part, just work with a performer. You're at MAGFest. There's guitarists everywhere. Meet somebody, and I'll talk about networking in a minute, but yeah. One of your number one tools as a composer, and Inverse Phase is in the room, so hi, Brendan. He's also a game composer. You should come sit with me.
Cake with you.
Come eat cake with me.
I stole it. They told me I would die if I ate too much of it, but I'm totally going back for seconds.
Yeah. So that position of networking is really important, especially when you're here, because you are surrounded by people who perform live instruments. On Masquerada that I was just telling you about, there are probably 5 people that I met at MAGFest that are now recording for me. A violinist, a woodwind player, 2 percussionists, and a guitarist. And I'll tell you, like, all you have to do is ask and share your music. So this panel is really about the business of stuff, but there's a lot of people that just are interested in getting started. And I know that we've both been through this a few times with different clients at different scales. Do you have any other questions? I want to make sure that I dive into like the specifics of the getting started before hopping into this. No? All right, let's do the business stuff. Sweet.
Here's how to get started. Talk to people.
Yeah, you have to talk
Like,
to people.
serious.
And that is slide number 1. Hunting for gigs. So this is a question I get asked all the time. Do you get asked this question a lot? How do you get gigs?
Yeah.
This question I used to have an answer for because there used to be a few communities for indie games that were just really buzzing. Like TigSource is one of them. There's a place called creategames.com, the Game Maker community. There's just a ton of different places you can go to interact with developers who are making games and kind of get into it. But there's a few do's and don'ts, and I would definitely want to address those.
Here's also how you get gigs.
You feed them cake? I don't want cake right now.
What?
Later. Trust
Josh,
me, you don't want to hear me
what's wrong with
chew. I don't know. Don't get weird
You
about
can
it.
just let it melts in your mouth, dude.
That's provocative. I don't know. I'm gonna sit over here now. Okay, so number 1, you don't want to be that person who's just sending their music everywhere, and you don't want to be that person who shows up on a thread where some developer is really excited, sharing screenshots like, "Let's check out this new game," and you just spam them with your music. That's like the worst thing that you can do. You want to be collaborative, because when you're actually writing music for a game, that's what you're doing. You're collaborating on an end product. You should try as hard as possible to make sure you're not in a relationship where you're just the music guy or the music girl. And the reason I say that is because if that's a developer's attitude, they're really going to treat you like you're a utility. And I feel like that's kind of where you're finding yourself in, Stefan, where it's like, okay, well, we just need somebody to do this thing we already have, keep doing it. And that's not fun. Now, I'm not just saying, like, don't do that, because there's a lot of value if you can do it comfortably. But at the same time, if your time is better spent doing other networking or improving your skills that you're comfortable doing, like, you're trying to find a style, right? And in finding a style and finding sounds, what you're doing is you're leaning towards the things that you like to do. Inverse Phase, we'll talk about this a lot, I'm sure. Like, you're not going to go out there and write an orchestral soundtrack for somebody. You're going to do your damn thing.
You usually stay within your own box.
Yeah. And there's a lot of benefit to doing that. Now, 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago when this industry was getting started, you're in a position where there's a lot of different games that are coming out of nowhere, and there's a few people that specialize in the technology. And that's where we were 20 years ago. There was very few people that could do the technology of the music to make the soundtracks. That's really changed. And it's changed so much that back then you needed to be able to do any genre because there were so few of you as composers. But now it's completely flipped. Everybody wants to write music
Your
for video
dog
games.
can write a soundtrack with software free from the internet. It's
Precisely.
yeah.
I think Grindcraft put a picture online where his cat laid on his arpeggiator and it made its own notes and he just used it for a track. It's literally that ridiculous now. So bottom line is collaborate. What I like to do and kind of like my strategy when I'm going after new gigs is I'll try to find developers that are working on something that inspires me as a musician to write in the style I like to write in. Because if I'm inspired to write in a different style, I'm probably not going to be as successful. So I'll really cater my search to finding developer threads. You can go to takesource.com in the forums and see people posting screenshots every Saturday of the game they're working on, and you can feel it and get inspired. That's how I found Oblatus. That's how I found. That's actually the story of every
Is it
does some games.
Oblatus? I keep on calling it Oblitus
I don't
because I
know.
like the word obliterate, but I don't
It's
know.
Latin, so I don't
No.
know. I don't speak Latin.
How is Oblitus pronounced?
Anyone?
Is it Oblatus or Oblitus or?
Yeah, I think they got a voiceover to say it too.
Oh,
Anyway.
okay. Anyway.
Yeah, so you wanna find these things that are inspiring, and that's what I did with Connor. And I basically told him hey, this was the exchange I had. I said, this looks really awesome. And he knew who I was vaguely, but everyone kind of knows everybody at some point. And you say, I was like, Connor, if I were gonna do sounds for this, and I was talking to him about the game first. I didn't jump into music. I started with, can I get a build of your game? Can I try to play it? Because it looks really cool. It's inspiring. That's what happened. I got a build. Then I wrote some music and I sent it to him and I said, what do you think about this? Is this something that would work for you? And he was like, oh, hell yeah, that sounds awesome. Do you want to actually do it? I waited for him to ask me. I didn't want to be the guy who was like, I want to write music for your game, let me do it. Because how many people do you think say that to a game developer? It's a lot. It's a whole lot. Yeah. And you'll also see that even when you get a gig, it's not really about sending that email. It's about having a relationship with that developer in some way, even if it's super informal. So, I don't know. I would go heavy emphasis on collaboration and giving them feedback on their product.
Are you skipping your other board?
Am I skipping them? No, I think I talked about them all.
Your third one on the last page.
Meeting people. Okay, yeah, I can talk about that. Fine. This is next line. Jerk. Should have invited you.
I'll just add some stuff there.
Yeah, go for it.
Basically, I would say, not to disagree with you, Josh.
Oh, everyone's different.
I would say number 3 is a maybe. But
Yeah.
but what you shouldn't do is what Josh is talking about. You should not push yourself on people.
Yeah.
But you should definitely write a soundtrack to a game that doesn't exist. Like he says, that's a good exercise, but also just to not only to exercise your stuff, but it puts you in the mode where you're going to place yourself under limitations and whatever. And also, there's what's a good example of royalty-free stuff?
Oh, everything's royalty free. You
Well-
can go to audiojungle.net and
Yeah.
find free
So-
music that you can use and just pay one time for.
So you can write an entire soundtrack to a game, put it up on a royalty-free site, and then have this whole RPG soundtrack that might end up in an RPG. And that's a good outlet for,
Yes.
I want to write this soundtrack and I want to get paid for it, but I don't know how to get it out there without pushing yourself on someone else.
Right. I really recommend that. Actually, that's a really great point. If you are just writing music and you're being prolific, not writing for games, but writing game music, he's right. There are places you can go. Audio Jungle is what I used for a long time, where I would just upload music. And it's not great, or even the stuff that I write for games that doesn't get used probably ends up there too, because people can come and get a non-exclusive license for $15 for a track. And I'm not making tons of money there. It's not really my thing. But at the same time, it's nice to know that if somebody does find it and wants to use it, they can. And I don't have to do a bunch of heavy lifting or contract writing to make it happen.
It's good for side income.
Yeah, it's really great passive income. And yeah, no, you did make a good point about the last point. You do have to meet these people at some point, and I think
Get off at Facebook, like, just talk to people.
Yeah, the people, like, you can sniff out when somebody's trying to talk to you because you want something from them, right? So that inverse thing is true. Like, if you go to somebody and you want something, they're gonna feel it, they're gonna know it. And it actually is something that kind of repulses most of the game developers I know, especially from the music side, considering it's the thing they get asked, can I do music for your game? It's like the number one thing that they get asked. They don't have people go, can I do art for your game? Can I do hours of programming labor for you? No, music is just the one. But yeah.
I find I get good responses from, are you taken care of for music? Or something
Yeah,
like that. Don't be like, I want to be your musician and you shouldn't use anyone else. But like, you know, you could just be like, hey, I'm a music guy, if you need anything, you know, you can still have sort of a lackadaisical attitude and, you know, get through to people better. Being pushy is the turnoff for people.
Definitely. So in the end, and this is really upsetting for me because I think when I got started, the one thing I wanted it to not be about was networking. And I think that's how we all kind of feel, but
Oh dear.
unfortunately, it fucking is all about networking at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You need to be present at developer conferences, game jams, anywhere where the people who are making the product you want to be a part of are making that product, you want to be there too. So what helped for me was going to game jams. Do you guys know what game jams are? Cool, awesome. And I think they even have one at Prime now,
Yeah.
where somebody hosts it. Yeah, it's awesome. Go do that. Go be a part of that. Go take a little keyboard or a tracker or just use the piano roll and get involved. And you'll get assigned a team, and that's your, I mean, if you've not done a game soundtrack before, that's your first game soundtrack. That counts. And you don't know what's going to happen with these games that come out of game jams either. There have been super success stories. I think Nidhogg is one of them. Was that? Towerfall's another really, really fucking good example. The guy who did the music for Towerfall, Alec Colloqua, who also made Aquaria and a bunch of other games, he is just a notorious game jam guy. He'll just go there, and I think his thing is Alec just sits in the corner and writes music and waits for game developers to walk up to him and be like, oh hey, this game jam thing, and he'll just be on a bunch of different teams as a result. So every game jam is different, and every person's different. GDC is an interesting thing because there's this big mantra that, oh, I gotta go to GDC if I want to do this. I feel like GDC is where you want to go if you want to schmooze with like AAA guys, or you want to somehow get into like the Ubisoft crowd, like just those bigger titles that seem like, you know, you're not going to get that gig anyway unless you've got experience. So I'm not going to sit here ever and say GDC is what you have to do. GDC is great for networking with musicians and audio guys and learning. They have an audio boot camp that's 2 days long before the main conference where you just learn how to use like Fmod, how to integrate with all the software that like Unity has now. But again, if it's bottom line writing music for you and you're passionate about it, I don't think GDC is like the requirement. It's fun to go, but meet and collaborate with other video game music composers, that's what GDC is good for, but that's also what MAGFest is good for. That's also what PAX Prime, any of these things are really great for that. And there's a lot of developer conferences too. Just because you do music and you love playing games, you are part of the development experience. You should treat yourself as such. If you do make a business out of it, it's even something you can start tax deducting, which is really cool. You get to buy your video games and write it off. So in that mindset, like treat yourself like a professional even before you are. Fake it till you make it is how you get confidence to do networking. So you fake it till you make it, you do your networking, and then you loop back around, you fake it till you make it, then you made it. And then it just works that way. That's the kind of the formula I've talked about with everybody.
And then you're doing it.
And then you're doing it. The trick to doing it is like what Yoda would say, just do it, right?
I think a shoe company said that once.
You know, it's a quote, man. I saw it on the TV box.
Shia LaBeouf said that.
Shia LaBeouf. I hate that guy. Okay. Other composers. This is a big problem that I don't really think I've felt it in a long time, but I remember a few MAGFests ago, there was this idea that like other composers were your competition or your enemy or something. It was a really weird, bizarre thing happening at that time, and I think it was also happening around a lot of like drama in the different communities too, but you can't have that attitude and be successful. You have to just be friendly and work with everybody and not set up walls for yourself. As soon as you're like, I don't want to do X with this Y product person thing, place, event, whatever it might be, you've just put up a wall for your success. Follow the path that you're just follow, right? So if you just do what you like to do and you keep your feet on that path, you will find yourself doing something that makes you really happy, and is probably this, if it's really what you're passionate about. And that's how it works.
Hey Josh, who's better, OC Remix or VG Mix?
I have no comment.
Don't fight.
They're both good. And working with other composers is actually great. So go meet a composer, right? And go talk to them if they're working on a project, and then maybe offer a remix. I've been on like the Fez Side Z remix album. I've been on Imposter Nostalgia by Big Giant Circles. I have a remix on the Super Meat Boy album. When you do that, every time you're on somebody else's album, giving them a remix, even if it's for free, which is something I would consider, what you're getting out of it is exposure and like a free ride. So there are a lot of composers I know as well whose backstory is, oh, I was on this collaborative remix album and this thing happened for me. That's kind of like the overall story of any composer that comes out of OC Remix, is they got seen, or heard rather, because they were on OC Remix, which is a big community of remixes. And somebody goes, oh, I really like the style of remixes you do. That's what I want my game to sound like, right? And that's how Danny B got Super Meat Boy, or not, well, whatever was before Super Meat Boy at the time, for him. That's what happened with Big Giant Circles and working with Jack Wall and Sam Hulick on Mass Effect 2.
That's what happened for me. I did Pretty Ape Machine, and people were like, oh man, I really love Nin and Pretty Ape Machine. Do you do originals? And like, I'm like, yes.
It's awesome. So I like the anecdote, to be heard is to be hired, and it's true because you can't just walk into a game and have it work out for you. You really do have to be heard, and so the more music you write, the more chances you have of being heard. The more opportunities you have for people to experience your music for free, because that's how, unfortunately, our day and age kind of is,
Sigh.
the better it is. It is all fucked up, and the industry is changing slowly but surely to kind of resolve that problem, but it's going to take years for the Copyright Office to deal with it. And I'll talk about that later too. So let's get right into it. So let's imagine you did get your gig, and your next step is like, okay, I've got this client, this game developer, and I need to figure out how the fuck do I get started, right? The number one thing I'll tell you, and I think everyone will tell you, is it's smart to have a contract. Now you have choices as to what a contract means for you. Do you need to be really anal and have like 6 pages of legalese? Do you need 16 pages or 60? I don't know, probably not. I'm of the opinion that if you can get what I would call a term sheet, which is a very basic version of a contract written in a table format that you can read and understand as a human, that's about as far as you really need to go as a composer if you've got the terminology right, and I'll talk about that. But the first thing you're going to tackle on that term sheet or contract is probably what you're going to charge, right? So there's a few ways to think about it, and it's really important that you don't shoehorn yourself into one. You can do any combination of these things. And I'm actually going to give you examples of some projects I've done and how I've priced it. So you can do free, which is awesome. You can do flat rate either per project or per minute. Or you can do revenue share, which is a percentage of the sales, which is, depending on the game, that could be awesome, or depending on the game, that could suck. So typically I usually ask for a percentage of the total estimated cost that is going to be the total if I'm doing a flat rate or a flat rate part. I'll ask for that up front as an advance. And I'll show you guys a sample term sheet and some stuff. You have to be really mindful about pricing. This is always a sensitive pot, and everyone's going to be different, but here's literally my experience. I'm going to talk about my experience. Maybe you should add yours afterwards, and then we can kind of combine. But for game jams, if I'm going to a game jam, I know why I'm there. I'm writing music. I'm adding to my experience as a game composer. I'm adding to the game developer's experience as working with other people. I'm getting free team experience. I'm getting something I can put on a resume, if that even matters anymore. Do people read resumes anymore? So if I'm doing a game jam, I'm doing it for free. If the game is going to go outside of the game jam and there's some other life cycle, I'm going to want to have a conversation about that, because then it's going to fall into one of the other two. It'll either be freeware, and for me, I've just always kind of done freeware for free. It's been kind of my mentality. I like that sharing is caring attitude. If it's a donation-based game, I might ask for a percentage of donation, or I might just keep the soundtrack and sell it, right? Pay what you want is free, but if people want to donate, it's also the same idea. I would be careful about taking freeware projects, though. As you all might imagine, like, your time is valuable. You can't just do all the music for free all the time, and it really kind of takes a big turd on the industry if everyone were to be doing all the music for free. At the same time, I think it's really important to juggle expectations, and pricing is a conversation. It's not something you can force down someone's throat. And if you take a conversational approach to it and offer options, you'll find the best result that works for both of you. Bottom line is just don't do something that makes you uncomfortable no matter what. It's not worth it. It never is worth it.
That kills your creativity too.
Yes, it'll kill your creativity. Like again, if you're not on your path and the thing you're working on isn't on your path, you're just straying and you're not really helping yourself long term. So that's why I say commercial games. There's not a formula. I like people always ask like, what should I charge? I'm like, I have no idea. I'm not in your position. Like, it's always different. When I started, I think my first project, I just asked for like $15, literally for the whole game, and it was like a small little like arcade game in a game maker or some equivalent, but $15, that was fine. I've gone from like 100 per minute to I've had one project that was 500 minutes per music, or $500 per minute of music, which is ridiculous, but it's not a lot of music you're going to write in that scenario, depending on the game.
And there are people charging like $1,000, $2,000.
Oh, yeah.
That are on the high end. So it's like, even that is kind of considered low depending on what it is.
Absolutely.
Excuse me.
Yeah. And there's some things that I'm going to talk about later that you'll see are very important when figuring out pricing, that allow you to kind of negotiate your price and understand what your options are for that comfort level. Yeah.
When you're charging something like $500 a minute, is that also covering costs of hiring performers and recording it, or is that just the composition?
That was everything is included in that. Yeah, which is interesting because if you think of it as a formula, it's actually a really shit formula because like I can write one 5-minute piece of music for that cost and then have another 5-minute piece of music that has like 17 performers and has a huge cost built into it, and you're like, wait a minute, how does that pricing model work? Could you totally like fish around it? And that's just the way it is, and that's actually what developers really expect is a per minute model, especially when they get into wanting buyouts, which I'll also talk about. But I'm going to go into the businessy part of the rights and all this crap so that you guys understand what's underneath your ability to make these contracts in the first place.
This is so fun right here.
This will be fun. I'll try to be quick about it and kind of concise. So, do you guys know that when you write a piece of music, you actually, or not write a piece of music, I should say, write and record a piece of music, you've got 2 copyrights you have to manage. Anybody know that? Cool. Maybe they're teaching something in music school now. There's the performance, which is the sound recording, and if you go to like Spotify or iTunes, you see a little P. That's what the P means. It's a performance copyright. So that's your sound recording. That's why you have labels, and that's where the performers want their money from. That's what the producer gets their money from. But that's not the 17 dudes writing a rap song and splitting the money. That's not the money they're splitting. They're splitting the composition because they wrote lyrics. So you move to part 2, which is the composition copyright. That's the underlying notes. If you think about sheet music. Historically, what it is was piano rolls. When we first were dealing with music copyright, it was for piano rolls of all fucking things. And if you wanted to cover a song, you were basically charging a duplication cost, and that comes from book copyright. And that is the basis of why everything in the music world is really messed up and why the royalty problem exists, why people aren't getting paid for Spotify plays that they should. It's all back to the fact that we made our music copyright based on book copyright.
Josh, I don't know anyone everyone's getting paid for Spotify, right?
I have some news to share with you. You are getting paid for your P, but you are not getting paid for your C.
Well, I'm glad I'm getting paid to pee because I do that every day.
Yeah, what's your question?
So what happens when the process of creation of something, a piece of music, is both of them together? Like I compose something in a DAW, the final product there is no MIDI file even necessary.
Yep. Let me walk you through a real world scenario. Does anybody in here have music on Spotify? No. This guy. Okay, I'll continue. So you uploaded your music to Spotify and you have P and C because you made it. Yeah. So when you made it, you actually have both automatically. When you upload it to Spotify, the way that you're signing, or not, you don't upload to Spotify, but through an aggregator, they're actually only asking you for P. And they want to make sure that you understand C if somebody questions you about it, but they're not actually getting really anal about it. And the government requires companies like Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, all these people have to withhold an amount for C that they don't always know how to pay. They know how to pay it for the major publishers, the 4 big, Sony, BMG, Universal, and Warner. They're getting all their Cs just fine. The rest of us, we're really not. Because there's no database where your composition exists, because you didn't go and make your song for your soundtrack and register it with the Copyright Office and with whomever else. Like, you have to go to a publishing company to actually get the composition copyright claimed for yourself, or you have to figure out how to go around it.
So what he's saying is we're getting the P in the A.
I like that. It's really a C in the A.
Well,
You think about
a
it.
P and the A over the subject of C.
It's a formula. Yeah, and that's actually my job.
Deducing Spotify.
It's actually my job at Louder right now is we're trying to figure out how to solve this problem for all of our musicians in addition to, as a service, everybody across the board. Yeah.
So if I write an original and I upload it instead of on Spotify, I put it on Louder,
Yes.
will the money I get be for both copyrights? I mean, honestly, I don't care. I
No,
just
yes,
care
that's a good
about
question.
how much money I'm getting, but
It's still a good question. No, it's fine. You should care. You're getting P if you do that. Now, we are not responsible for C. Spotify is, right? So Spotify pays a company called the Harry Fox Agency right now to pay this C. And unless you are somehow connected to a HFA or a publisher who's connected to HFA, you're not getting C. It's not the distributor or so the TuneCores of the world, the Louders, the Bandcamps. We don't, well, Bandcamp is a different story, but we don't have to pay C as distributors. That's on the distributor, the company like Spotify themselves. So yeah, it's a messed up situation, long story short. Now the things we're doing at Louder right now are trying to solve this problem across the board, and that would require us to do that for everybody that is on those platforms. So it's a really big problem. But our goal is to one day really help kind of bridge that gap, especially for the indies. Like if you do go to Louder and upload your music, you should be able to get all the royalties across the board. And that includes Sound Exchange. Is anybody familiar with Sound Exchange? Sound Exchange is a company that will pay you for your P on places like Pandora, right? So if you submit your music to Pandora and it gets played, or it gets played on the radio or internet radio, those are performance royalties that fall under P, and Sound Exchange is collecting those, and you can go claim them. And if you have music on Pandora or Spotify or anywhere, you should be able to get a portion of it there, theoretically. And I heavy emphasis on theoretically. So it's really important, I think, to really understand that when you write a song, you're dealing with composition. When you produce and record it, it's a sound recording, even if that process is the same, which for most of us, I'm sure it really is. You had a question?
Yeah, it was regarding the difference with Bandcamp versus the other services,
Mhm.
since my current work is up on there.
Yeah, perfect question. So Bandcamp is special because Bandcamp, sort of like SoundCloud, hides behind the DMCA. Which is sort of that thing where you go and upload copyrighted pictures and you get a takedown notice and you've been bad, and it's what protects piracy, right? So SoundCloud and SoundCloud and Bandcamp hide behind that, and they don't deal with either one of these. They just pay the person who uploaded it and should claim the money. And the interesting thing here is that's why if you go to Bandcamp and you want to upload a cover song, Bandcamp is a big disclaimer: you cannot upload a cover song. Do not do that. Please don't do that. And the reason is because they're hiding behind it. They're really relying on users to know that they own both the P and the C. And if you don't own P and C and you upload to Bandcamp, you are technically breaking the law. So when you upload a cover song to Bandcamp, you're breaking the law, even if it's free. But who gives a shit? And I would say that 1,000 times, who gives a shit? And you should say who gives a shit, because no one's going and hunting down your music on Bandcamp to find that problem. Now, does that mean that one day there won't be a big crusade against the indies of the world to get all the cover song royalties claimed from Bandcamp? I can't answer that.
If
But
you
it's something to be
dig
aware of.
really deep into their legalese, they actually do say it's okay.
If you own if you have permission.
Yeah.
Yes.
If
So
you
you
own
can
the
upload a
rights.
cover song, of course. It's presupposing, of course, that you have all of the permission you need on both ends of the P and the C.
If all your ducks are in a row.
Right. So, there's that.
Does that constitute a remix as well? I mean, do they?
Oh, absolutely. So, if you have a remix, especially if you've sampled something, like you pull a sample out of another song, like you get like mashups and such,
Right.
that's a big no-no. You don't have that either. But again, unless that label, whoever owns the sound recording, goes after you, you're going to be okay.
I think he might also be referring to an arrangement as in an OC remix.
Well, I'm just saying
and-
Game Chops did the Spin Dash thing.
Right.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
None of those are, they're not a cover. Like, you say cover, I'm thinking, it's my version, line for line, bar for bar, note for note.
Oh, okay.
When I say cover, remix is like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Re-
so sorry.
Rearranging the notes.
Yeah,
Which is still, the answer still applies.
Yeah, it's
really.
the same. So a cover is an
You're still using
arrangement.
the composition,
Right.
even if you're changing it up a little bit. They could still say, well, this entire melody line is the same in both, even though you changed up the chord
Yep.
progression. You could probably get that argued in court, and
That just happened with not Pharrell Williams. Somebody really big just got.
that, are you talking about the whole blurred lines
Yes, Robin Thicke, thank you.
But he did, but he did sample, I mean, the whole.
I mean, yeah, he was
Yeah.
pretty blatant. He was pretty blatant, but that's a pretty dangerous copyright precedent, given that it's not verbatim.
So how about, I think I probably know the answer is that it's complicated, but how about like samples? So like I wrote an original that uses like drum samples from the
Yeah,
internet.
so you have to have the sound recording copyright of the sound recording you've sampled. You have to permission to use it. And if you don't, there's no service that's going to license that for you, because this has a system under the Copyright Office that allows you to make a cover of a song and pay a statutory rate, and I'll talk about that in a minute. P has no system in the Copyright Office or flow whatsoever for licensing things. That's why sampling is such a big issue. There's no system. And you've got, you're literally in a situation where if I go and rewrite the Mario theme, I know that I have to pay 9.1 cents per copy that I make, and I'm fine. That's all I have to do. But there's nothing like that for P. Okay. So when you make the soundtrack for a game, there's usually this idea that somebody's saying like, oh, just here you have the music and you use it, but people, especially when they get started, don't formalize definitions, and then they find themselves like, oh, but then they used my music in this way and it made me uncomfortable. That's because you didn't write out all the stuff protecting yourself, and I can quickly show you how to protect yourself end to end, and this is what I do. So to understand this, you have to start understanding the licenses that you can grant with your music for your composition, and your sound recording is very open-ended. But you've got the mechanical right. This is the right that you have when you make a reproduction of a sound recording or a composition. So physical CD is under this category, digital soundtracks, anything that's not synchronized or performed. And I'll talk about synchronization in a moment. So if you were going to go to a client and you said, I want you to have the right to, not even talking about the music in the game at this point, but just say that's figured out. You're talking about wanting to have them sell your music on a Steam bundle or a Humble bundle or anything like that, where the game has the soundtrack included as a separate concept that can be consumed. You have to give them the mechanical right to do that. So it's called a mechanical, and that's where I was talking about the music roll. It's called mechanical because it was a mechanical copy back in the day. And this is what I was saying, where you actually can pay 9.1 cents and do this to the Copyright Office if it's been released in America. That's like the rule, right? So Nintendo can block a lot of covers of their music on the basis that they never released soundtrack CDs in America. And there's a really nasty trend coming out of Japan right now where they are starting to release soundtracks to the games like Mario Kart 8 in Europe, not America, specifically to avoid this reason, this rule. So they're trying to block these cover albums that are coming out, because Nintendo and a lot of Japan companies are very much of the opinion that if we did not plant the seed for a project that involves our IP, you better not be doing anything with it. Even if it's awesome, we better have had the idea, or we're just going to shut you down. And you guys might have heard about the Kickstarter with Final Fantasy VI and Overclocked Remix. They got taken down. It came back up because they did a lot of negotiating. They lost a lot of their power. Had they understood this a little better and done this properly before the album went on Kickstarter, they probably would be making a whole lot more money than they actually did, which is kind of a sad story. But anyway, the performance license is probably not relevant to video game music in a contract unless you've got somebody who wants to like put on a concert of your music or have it played on the radio in some special way. I can't speak to this too much, but this is what you're talking about when you hear about things like BMI or ASCAP. Those are performance royalty collection people that when you have a venue that plays your music, you're going to get a performance royalty through them. Synchronization is what we're all doing in video games. And synchronization means to synchronize music with a video or an interactive game. And it is because this is separate from mechanical that we can't do like Twilight Princess remixes or Ocarina of Time remixes even, because that's all never been released. Well, Twilight Princess I think did. But Ocarina of Time is in this category, a lot of Mario music is in this category. And it's really sad because at Louder we're trying to like really facilitate these cover albums, and people request us getting licenses we just can't get. Anyway, so as a game composer, what you want to do is you want to make sure in your contract that you're granting a synchronization license. And you usually do this informally by saying you have the right to use my music in your game. But think about what that statement means. You have the right to use my music in your game. It could be a lot of different things. What game? Does the game have a sequel? Can they use it in that? Can they use it in advertising for the game? These are all things that if you think about, you can really help yourself. So my bottom line usually, speaking personally, is I'll always give you the right to do synchronization if it's advertising or in the game, be it for the game or your company as a whole. Like if you like my song so much and you want to have an ad on TV about your company and you're going to use it, awesome. That's never happened. I'm just being facetious, I suppose. But that's definitely the idea. So I'll probably just get into some examples to better explain that. But do we have any questions so far? Awesome. I know it's super fun stuff. So pricing and rights together, this is why I wanted to come back to pricing, because now you have the rights, you can understand that, okay, well, if you only want to pay me $100 per minute of music, instead of giving you the right to own the music and do whatever you want with it, I'm going to grant you a synchronization license that limits your ability to do anything. You can use it in the game alone, but you can't, do X, Y, and Z other things that you might have wanted to. You help them understand that, and you probably feel better about how your music's being used, especially if you've already written the music, and you're doing the contract after the fact, which is something you should try to not do. Or if you're just getting started, like these are just things that make you look more professional, it makes people respect you a bit more, which is a stupid idea. I don't think that should be the way it is, but it seems to be. And it gives you really the power to do what you want. So the key to success in every case is just to know the palette of options on your table and to make your own fucking rules every time. And I will go back to this I'll never write a contract that he'll write, and he'll never write a contract that I'll write, but we'll both be super successful and super happy. There's not a formula. So when you have the understanding of those three rights, you're in a much better position, like I said, to negotiate. And I'm just going to show you some examples of shit that I've done, which I don't think very many people do, but I don't know. So I did a freeware game soundtrack called Gun Girl 2. It was a small German developer, just one guy. I liked his game so much. It was one of those cases I went to take Source and I played it, and I wasn't interested in doing the music originally, but then I had a lot of fun. It was like Doom, but side-scrolling. It had that same energy, so I was all about it. So I just did it up front, no fees. I didn't charge him anything. I gave him the sync license. I don't even think I called it that at the time. I just knew how to say, don't do this and that. I kept the ownership of the music, and I sold it on Bandcamp. And I made honestly, I made like a grand, and pay what you want at zero, because that's what people liked it. The game was popular because it was free. So here's a case where, I've said I didn't charge the client, but I made money. And, would I have made as much money if I charged like 100 per minute or 50 per minute? Probably not. Did I need to? I was just getting started. I wanted exposure. The money I made was just sugar on top, because I wanted to do Gun Girl and get more gigs. But always think about it. Don't sell yourself short. Had I not thought to put the soundtrack on Bandcamp and to do this and that and try to get it in front of people's faces, that's money I wouldn't have had. So, I don't know. That's $1,000 to put in sample libraries. There's so many different ways to get money, and that's what you want to do with the royalty-free stuff too, is think about yourself as a business, put your money into a category where you're keeping some of it for your living costs or whatever, but always put back into your ability to create music. Because how many times do people's computers blow up and you can't open Cubase anymore, and all the VSTs suck, and my life is hell. Enough.
Welcome to working with MIDI.
Exactly. So, did I skip one here? Nope. So I did a commercial PC game called Oblitus, we just talked about, Oblitus. I did that for $0 up front. This game got published by Adult Swim, and I just asked for a revenue share. I gave them the sync rights and the ability to use it on, there was a small ad on TV that was really cool. So I gave them, said just use it. I put it out on Bandcamp and Ladder, and that was that. So this is a game where, you would see it at PAX, right? And this is kind of, I don't know that I would give the advice for somebody to do this, but what I would say is, I knew this developer pretty closely by the time that we got started. And we'd known each other for a while, so the $0 up front was all trust-based on the revenue share, and I got a nice revenue share out of it. So this is where I'm saying you can combine your options. If I go to a developer and I say, okay, I want, this is high, but if I want 8%, he should, hopefully, if he's sane, say no. But then you negotiate. You say, okay, well, I wanted to originally maybe charge you 50, not 50, but maybe like $200 per minute. We do $200 per minute with 2% revenue share. Think about these things. Even the smaller developers that haven't gotten started, they're making their donation-based games. Even that is stuff to talk about because it really helps you. And again, if you're going at it with the attitude of collaboration, not being a utility or asset, they will understand why having you get a rev share is important. If I am super passionate about this soundtrack I made and I put it in front of a bunch of people's faces, I can at least give back and help build the brand of Oblitus, whatever that brand might be. And I feel like I'm a part of that team. Now, had he said, hell no, let's just pay you up front, I immediately feel less attached to it because I'm not getting a commission on its success. If I'm not pushing energy into its success, it's not going to change what I got paid. So that's kind of your bargaining chip if you're trying to go for revenue share. You just want to say, look, I understand that you have costs and that paying these accounting fees every quarter or whatever for royalties is painful, but if you do it, you get the fact that I'm going to be really into this. I'm going to share the soundtrack forever. I'm going to share the game and be really vocal about it. And if you put the energy into doing that and you prove that that's how you act, the next client comes along and sees that too. And you say, okay, you know, like, look at Obladus. I did all this X, Y, and Z. It got a little more coverage because of the soundtrack because I did this thing. This was because it was rev share, I would tell the new client. And they would say, okay, well, maybe that's something worth talking about. With Ravenmark, at the time I did it, it was orchestral. I did it for $250 per minute, and it ended up being like 70 minutes of music. It was all digital orchestrations. I didn't have any performers, so it was just a lot of work right there. And most of that money went right back into like the libraries that I used to do it. Not most of it, a lot of it. And stuff I did for scrolls as well. So again, you just got to know to keep the rights that you want. So that was something where I did it for that much because I knew, you know, maybe I'm doing the labor of 500 or the labor of 1,000 or whoever. I don't even know how you make that arbitrary decision. You really just have a conversation with that developer. And then you say, okay, well, if this is all I'm getting and, you know, this is your end goal, I was only comfortable saying you can do the sync music for the game and for advertising. And let's leave it at that. Masquerada is that big game that I was telling you guys about. And this is something where I've done tiered pricing. So now, especially with my commitment at Louder, I'm like juggling a really hard time schedule. And what I had to tell them was like, okay, I'm really going to overcharge you a lot. I said, if you really want me, I'm going to give you a big flipping number if you only want 30 minutes, because the amount of time it takes to make orchestral music of the thing you're asking with all the performance you're asking, so essentially I start high there, and as they commit more music, I bring it down a lot. And they had a budget that they were working with. So I fit my number around their budget. And that's something that can be a really helpful tool in negotiating too, is understanding their budget. So if you're willing to ask these questions that, you know, especially seem hard to ask the first time, it pays off. So then you can go back with that number and you can do this. Like if a developer literally says, you know, hey Josh, I'm sorry, I literally only have $500, but I want, you know, an hour of music, I can come and try to figure something out with all this information now that makes it work for me, or I say, no, it doesn't work for me, and I move on. So it's really good to know budget and expectations of developers as well. So keeping the ownership of the music is my number one thing. As soon as somebody uses the word buyout with you, do you guys know what a buyout is?
They get all the copyright.
Yeah, so a buyout means that you're doing basically a work for hire, which is you basically put your ego in the trash can, and all the work you're doing belongs to the company or whoever you're signed the contract with. And that puts you in a terrible position because you can't do anything with your soundtrack anymore. You can't sell it, you can't get it out there. And here's a horror story for you. So you guys know the game for Transistor, Bastion, right? Amazing soundtrack, probably sold really well, you bet, right? Poor Darren he did a buyout, which means he didn't see that money. Now, what do you get out of a buyout? A buyout has its advantages. I can take whatever number I would put here and say I keep the money, probably multiply it by 3 or 4 or 5. Literally, that's where you get the $2,000 things. They are selling all of their music. Like Jack Wall, he's never going to be able to go sell his soundtrack of Mass Effect or Myst or any of those awesome soundtracks. That's all going to have to be the publishing company's willingness to do that for him and hopefully give him a cut of the revenue. But no, they don't have to if it was a buyout. So it is important that if you do a buyout or something like that, you are really, really mindful about saying, if you're going to sell a soundtrack, I need to be involved. We need to negotiate that later. I can't emphasize that enough. I am, as a base rule, I'm a no buyout person. Like if you say buyout to me, I would literally just turn around and say, okay, then you can have the buyout. You can't have a soundtrack unless we negotiate it. And I multiplied all my numbers by 6. Have a nice day. Because I literally just not worth my time. And it doesn't make me want to work on your project either, unless, even if you were like The Last of Us or something, I'd still have a lot of trouble with that.
It's like asking if you want a really high-paying, you know, warehouse or stocking job that is super quiet and super good conditions, except you have to stand knee-deep in shit.
Yeah. And knee-deep in shit is a big thing, because you don't know what's going to happen. Like maybe somebody might come to you later on and, like, I can't think of any particular example of this, but you know, you do have those cases where these video game soundtracks become popular, like Civ 3's Bobby A2, right? Well, if he doesn't have the right to do anything, he's no longer involved in any conversation about what happens with that composition. And that's a terrible feeling as a composer. It's like your work of art, and you don't own it. So that's just me ranting about buyouts.
I was just going to say, do you think this is like getting more and more common in the industry that buyouts don't happen for music, that like in 50 years, even AAA games,
I don't know.
Or do you think it's just going to be sort of tiered, the indies, well, it's all like this, and then AAA is like, well, we own the composer?
That's hard. That depends on the AAA developer. Like, everyone's different.
Every situation is different.
Every situation is
Every time.
different, and you have antiquated companies that have these mindsets. They're not going to change. Maybe they will after 50 years, but I can't see the future.
I don't think Nintendo is going to do, write the music for a Mario game, but you can keep it.
I mean, Nintendo is like Ghostwriter Central too, so like I don't feel great about that either. But I don't know. I hope so. Yeah, but it's hard to say. I think that it's not something you divide by indie and corporate, because I know there are a lot of corporations that are willing to not do buyouts. I don't know. I hope so.
And yeah, I think it's worth pointing out. You mentioned that like music is a special case, and it actually is a special case. If you end up, because I work, even though I've spent a long time in the industry, I now do a lot of programming, and basically every role except for music right now, if you get like a generic contract from the company, which is why it's easier, and pretty much every generic contract for any role except for music is going to be they're giving the rights because in particular it's a pain in the ass to distribute rights. So if you end up using their contract, make sure it's not the totally generic contract, because otherwise you're pretty much signing away the rest of the music.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah. He's very, very accurate. These companies will just want to hand you a contract that you're going to sign as a work for hire. Don't do it. At least ask all your friends if it feels right. I don't know.
Yeah, especially if you don't end up using all of it. Like the way I negotiate it is, like since I work in a lot of open source stuff, it's like this doesn't count. Only the stuff that gets committed to your repository and it ships in this specific binary.
Yeah, that's like the point. Like, no two formulas are the same, right? So like, make your own path, right? Like, if you feel like something you're doing needs to be set up a certain way. Let's talk about music specifically. Let's say that, excuse me, I really want to do a cover of someone else's song and have that integrated in a game. If they're saying they need ownership, so they want to block it, I can maybe talk to them and convince them why it's beneficial for them to move that path. Like, why should I use a Fez remix in my next soundtrack, and why would that be beneficial, and how is it legal, and how does it work? They'll probably be upfront, fuck no, that sounds like a nightmare. I'll say, well, I can take care of it because I have the background too, but X, Y, and Z, this is going to happen, and it's going to be big for this reason. And if you understand the industry, you understand your demographic, you can do things like that. I guess the last thing to talk about kind of on the business track is just sort of like increasing your opportunities. You want to distribute your soundtrack always, 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 always. It's so sad when I play a game and it's got great music and I can't find it. So what I would tell you is I talk about distribution being putting it on places like iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Bandcamp. But what I don't talk formally about is like SoundCloud and YouTube. Put your music everywhere and do it before somebody else does it, especially on YouTube. If you take the time, I've got so many soundtracks somebody else uploaded on YouTube that they can even collect ad revenue for, and I really wouldn't give two shits, to be honest with you, because I don't care. But if I were to do it first, obviously that would be beneficial. So I did it with Oblatus, and it was in fact beneficial because I could put an ad on maybe track 2 and 5, and people just kind of going down the soundtrack would pay that as a result. So I don't know. So talking about where to do that, Bandcamp is my favorite. Still, because it's got the best direct to the fan experience. They keep 15% of your profits. It's a great service. I'm sure everybody's used Bandcamp here. Louder is the service that I helped build. It's the same concept of Bandcamp with built-in third-party distribution and licensing. So if you do a cover song, like if you want to do the Smooth McGroove album where you cover Final Fantasy 1 from beginning to end, you can do that with Louder and not have to worry about legal anything or royalties anything. Louder will do it. And Louder has the direct-to-store thing too. But the nice thing that Louder does for collaborators, and I talk about collaboration a lot, is if you go and you work with that guitarist, and you maybe don't have $50 to give that guitarist right now, or $100 or whatever, you can use a service like Louder to do revenue splits and pay them directly, so you don't have to do subcontracted tax crap. If you pay somebody and you have to funnel royalties every month, that's kind of painful, so you want all the tools you can. I put my music in both places, to be honest, and I do the revenue calculations myself on Bandcamp. I always do revenue shares with my performers. It feels dirty not to. I would recommend, if you guys have performers, that you consider it as well. So let's do some questions. I just want to kind of come full circle and figure it out. If anybody's interested in seeing a sample term sheet, I would like to hear that you are interested, and I'll show you. But if you're not, I don't want to. Okay, let me answer a few questions first.
I've seen one in terms of electrical engineering, not music.
Right, yeah, music ones are interesting. Should I show it? Do you guys all care? Yeah, okay.
While Josh is looking for that, he's not self-promoting Louder. as heavily. The one thing that makes Louder amazing, other than his bullet points, is that all of those stack. And I think not a lot of people realize that.
Yeah.
So, you can sell your music on iTunes, but it's licensed, and it'll get split.
Yeah.
All of those services work together. It's
Yeah.
not like you can put it on iTunes, but it can't be a cover, or they can license your covers, but it's all together.
Yeah. So Louder is like Futures as being like the direct solvent for your music distribution or licensing problem. And one day we'll get there, but it's just a hard fight to get everything figured out. So here's a sample term sheet. I probably just want to talk about the things on the left, things on the right, because everything's in a category here. And the thing you'll see here is actually I've worked with our with our legal team at Louder enough to know what these term sheets look like that clients want to see. And when I gave this to the game developer for the first time in this format, I actually got a lot of praise because they're like, "Oh my God, thank God I can read this, I understand it." So I recommend doing this because this seems to have changed my relationship with like 2 different developers. So basically, you just need to do the legalese thing. Everyone knows what legalese is. It's like okay, cool. So you've got your parties involved, and you just want to clearly define it so I don't have to rewrite the game's name or whatever. So you've got a section for that, and then you've got a summary. Basically, I'm going to write music for your awesome game, and you're going to give me a means to get feedback and for reviews and any rewrite requests you might have, and I'll talk about rewrites and all that stuff. The territory, of course, worldwide, it needs to be stated. The term is defining like the term of your services and what you're going to provide. And how long it's going to take. So the term is about the time period of the next section. So the composition services is what I'm doing. I'm composing. I'll do that until the game's complete under this contract. All the rights that I talk about in here will extend until that game is complete and afterwards. You talk about the resources provided by the client, and I'm going to put this online. Like, I don't expect you guys to remember, and I don't think anybody really wants to. Then you put resources provided by client, which is basically what you're doing in Finite. But what the client is giving to you during your process in Finite. So playable builds seem obvious. If you don't put this in a term sheet or a contract, they have no obligation to give you any material to help you write. So these are things that are useful to put in these contracts. They're going to provide feedback. That's also something that's good to explicitly ask for, because you'll be surprised how many clients say, "I don't give a shit, just write music." But you want to make the best product, and you ultimately want to succeed as a composer. So if your music doesn't fit and you don't have feedback, you can write the best music in the world for the wrong game and not ever know it. So access to scripts, recordings, artwork, any concept material, you want to ask for those explicitly too. You're going to define the services that you're going to give. So ideation, conception, production of the soundtrack seems pretty straightforward. Consultation on implementation. So I get into this consultation thing in regards that I do a lot of the technical implementation and creative implementation side of interactive soundtracks for the games I do. Masquerada is going to be one that's really heavy like that. So I talk about consultation for when you should use the right music, how you should implement it, how should we use interactive cues for any dynamic system, and I really want to be involved in that, so I get that because I put that. I have a fee section. So these numbers are not something I've actually used on a client, but what I want to address is how you can think about that budgeting problem with the tiered thing I talked about a minute ago. So imagine you have a client says, we have a budget for $25,000 for music. That's a really awesome budget, by the way, but it's not going to be the orchestra budget, right? But any indie, I think, would love to get a contract like this. I've yet to see one personally, but it'd be cool. And what I'll tell you is, with this kind of approach, I would say your commitment is to try to write as little music as possible to fit the budget so that you're doing the least amount of work to get the most amount of money. But at the same time, you want to make a good product. So where I slide with this is, let's do that really high amount if you don't get that much music, and maybe don't use all your budget. And then as you ask for more music, we're going to take the rate down as total, right? Even for the music I wrote in the, before we're writing up to the first 45 minutes, all of that music rate goes down and you end up landing at the budget you want. And if they write over their budget, I'm going to benefit from that. It's going to go over their budget. I'm going to get more. There's not a cap or any more tiering that has to happen. The payment schedule is something that's important to put in there. You want to ask for advance if there's money involved every time, if possible, even if it's super small, because it's just the willingness and commitment of the party you're working with to actually pay you. And their ability to pay you, you'll be surprised, is also important. So a lot of indies I've worked with, or I've heard also horror stories about, oh, I had the funds to pay you, I can do it, but for some reason, I'm international, it didn't work. So if you have an advance, even if it's $5 for somebody small, the benefit you get is knowing that they have a way to pay you and they can't BS you later about that subject. And that's just not something you want to be in the position of. I ask for just kind of keeping my process is to have drafts. I'll send out drafts. They'll approve the drafts, which then immediately makes things billable. If they don't approve it, I'm not going to bill them for it. But they approve it, then I'll take the draft and I'll finish it and I'll bill them for that. And so I keep track of the ongoing kind of costs that I've built up in the process of making this music, and I'll charge them after the advance is kind of extinguished, I suppose. I'll charge them on the 25th, just for any music that have been approved up to that point. And that gives you, for big projects, that's perfect. For little projects, that's maybe not a thing. I've never had a payment schedule, except for big things. With indies, it's usually just like do an advance, and then when the game's done, we'll do it.
One thing I do frequently is half to start, half on delivery.
Yeah, that's good.
That's good for soundtracks that kind of have a trickle. And like when I was working on Shuttle Scuttle, the guy was kind of working on the game throughout the year or whatever, and he would just be like, I need like 2 songs by the end of next month, is that okay, or whatever, or just get it to me when you can, that sort of a thing. And so I would be like, can you, I'm okay, we're going to work on stage 7 and stage 8. Can you give me, payment for one of the tracks now and one of the tracks later? And just have, a friendly agreement with who you're writing for on, how you're going to handle something like, you called them remakes or rewrites. I usually call them do-overs.
Do-overs.
Some people call them mulligans.
Mulligans, yeah. I like mulligan a lot. That should be the formal thing. Shit. I don't have with this, since I started doing drafts, I don't do rewrites very often because usually it gets caught in the draft phase. And the nice thing about drafts too is that you really get your creative statement made, and you early, before you put a lot of time and investment into it, if they're gonna like it. It does, the whole point is to avoid rewriting, and that's the section here. So the worst feeling in the world, I think, as a game composer is when you write this awesome track and you're like, they're gonna love this, and you send it and they're like, fuck this. Yeah. This is not right. Or some variation, maybe, hopefully it's a little friendlier.
That is why you do drafts.
Yeah, that's why you do drafts.
Even if your draft isn't like baller and,
right.
Putting everything out there and just blowing the doors off, at least they can get an idea of, like the melody that you're gonna do or something.
Exactly. And if you're doing any, especially the digital orchestration stuff, where 90% of your work is tweaking knobs and making the orchestra sound real for some stupid reason that we've found ourselves in this position, this is important to have drafts. I do shitty MIDI orchestra drafts, and I'm like, you know what I can do with this, so just figure out if you like the song or not. With rewriting policies, I've seen about 1 million different things. I'll just share mine, but everyone's different. I'd say that a rewrite is required if they reject it and they need to replace it. That's just the definition. I give them usually up to, depending on the size of the project, it always depends, somewhere up to like 5 rewrites, but that's for a small project, that's ridiculous. Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say for a big project, that's good. I usually say 1 per 5. Like if it's a 10-song soundtrack, they get 2.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's
something like that.
That can work. And basically what I'll do is I'll say, okay, after you've extinguished your free rewrites, we're going to just basically, I'm going to charge you a fraction of what I would have charged you had you used it. But the nice thing about this, I get to charge you for it, but then it becomes out of the scope of the things you actually paid for, and again, I can do whatever I want with it. So that's a labor cost. I say, okay, for a quarter of the cost, you don't get the rights for the music that you didn't use, blah, 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 that's obvious. But now I can take this unused track and go put it on that royalty-free site we talked about earlier and make some additional income because I liked it, it was a good track, and maybe I want somebody to pay for it. Or maybe it ends up on an album, I don't know, I can do anything with it. That's the beauty of it.
It's not with the intention to double dip, but it's a side bonus.
It's definitely a side bonus. Looking through this, yeah, and just talking about specifics to kind of make the different cases a bit apparent for a client. I think this is stuff that just looking at online would make the most sense. Delivery schedule is really important. If you think that if you don't know the schedule that you're doing with your client, things get really nasty. And if you neglect to put it in a contract and your expectations don't match, you find yourself in a really, really precarious situation. You don't want to be the guy who's like, I thought I was going to have an hour of music today, but you're not done at all. So put in the date in your term sheet or in the whatever negotiation phase you have so that you both completely understand when things are going to be done. Transfer of rights talks about all that crap we just went over, the license, the mechanical license. This is the thing maybe to copy and paste, I don't know. I give them a sync license for any platform, all advertising for the game or the client as a whole. The right to reproduce those sound recordings, because the sound recording is a different thing. The mechanical license I give them, I actually said to them basically with my clients, if you guys want to if somebody wants to go to you and get a cover, let's let you do that. Like maybe it's going to be for advertising that you want to get a cover song. Like again, this is just being dreamy, I guess, as a composer. But it's nice, and it always makes them feel really good because they feel like they're getting more out of the money they're paying. So I give them the ability to make covers and license and take a percentage of those royalties in some cases, but not all. And if it's for advertising, I'm just like, go do it. I don't need royalties. Just only use it in advertising, and it's fine. This is my favorite section, co-marketing. And this is something I think most composers I've talked about never think to do. Co-marketing means that you and your client, the game developer, are going to work together to make marketing happening for both the game and the soundtrack. So I make the client make what we call a best commercial effort, because they can't guarantee in most cases that they can do these things. I say, make a best commercial effort to offer a digital bundle of the game with the soundtrack on any digital marketplace where you can. And then I put some examples. If you can do it on Steam or Humble, the Humble store, let's do that. And you're going to facilitate and administrate the royalty payment that we're going to negotiate when you do it. So it's not figured out what those costs would be, because who knows what their marketing schedule or prices are going to look like down the line or what they want to do. So you just put this in here so that you know that they will make the best commercial effort they can, which is really arguable, that they'll try to do this for you. So I know when any game comes out, if they put it on Steam or something, I can go to them and say, okay, let's talk about the plus $2 bundle. On Steam, in particular, if game players love to just click the +2 and get the soundtrack. I don't know why. But what I do know is that I've talked to 4 different people who have done it, and what I know is that most of their income from music ultimately came from that stupid little bundle on Steam, if the game did well. It's absurd. So this line right here is probably the most valuable thing I have in this whole contract. The fact that I can really push them to make that bundle happen and to help market my soundtrack. Likewise, I do the same thing. I try to make the best commercial effort to make an original soundtrack that's available for sale for them, that makes their brand look good, and then anything that we want to do to negotiate rates of IP, we can talk about that. And I think that's, again, for how little that section is compared to the others, is the most valuable one. Anyway, that's a term sheet. Any questions?
About anything.
Anything?
Yeah, no, you mentioned you were going to be posting it online, so is there going to be like a mailing list or something?
Yeah, actually, if you guys,
Cultural.com.
that's my Bandcamp. I'm not gonna put you on a mailing list, but I'll get your email just so I can send you an email.
You can find it at termsheet.wtf.
Yes, there's licensing.wtf. Not on the internet. This is gonna work for me. Let's do some stickies. Woo! Doing some cover licensing. Okay, yeah. If you just come up after this, and I'll do it, and I won't show your email with it to everybody.
Well, it's good networking.
I'll give this out.
No, I'll put you on a spam.
It really is so good.
Feels
It's
like
good networking. I
coffee
can
cake?
use
Oh,
this.
fuck,
Yeah,
that's
like
good.
coffee, chocolate, Kahlua, whatever.
Hell yeah. That's dope.
I didn't like that.
Cool. No questions? This was easy. Yeah, I recommend that you guys, if you're in the area and you want to learn more, MAGFest Prime, there's a huge panel that's dedicated to like getting started, the details, the tools, the digital audio workstations, how do you make chiptunes, all that stuff. He has a really great panel. Are you doing it this weekend?
I haven't applied, but this weekend.
Yeah.
Actually, tomorrow we're doing a composition contest, which does not have a winner, does not have a loser, does not require a certain skill level, and you can even remain anonymous in the contest if you really want to. But the entire point is just to put you in front of a laptop with some earphones. I'll give you a prefab project file so you can just go. And you have to write some semblance of music in an hour, and at the end, we're just going to play all the songs that everyone
You're having a 1-hour compo.
It is a 1-hour
Damn
combo.
it. When is it?
It's 11.
AM?
Yeah. 11 p.m. on Sunday, everyone will be gone.
That's why I'd win, man.
Yeah. Yeah, come to the
Yeah,
1 hour
go to that.
combo.
Also, the panel
It'll be a lot of
you-
fun.
that you brought up in the front about OC Remix has a, what's it called?
Yeah,
How to get
how
started
to
making
remix.
That panel, how to start doing remixes, is super valuable for people who even don't give a shit about remixes because it's really about production and
How to
stuff,
use
too.
a DAW,
Yeah.
really.
It's, here's an ad for FL Studio.
Here's how to copy and paste
Well,
things,
it's Jimmy and Andy
which
for you.
is extremely useful, actually. Copy and paste is a very good musical tool.
No, I know. Awesome. So I have some cards up here. If anybody wants to take them, you can get a hold of me. But also, if you want me to email you this term sheet, I can totally do that. Just give me your email.